Hey everyone! So today we're going to be going over weather, particularly rain and its interaction with the city. And it's currently raining outside, so it's kind of perfect for today's lesson. So yeah, rain. Let's start. The main ingredient, and really the only ingredient to rain, is water. So water particles are in the sky that have evaporated. They rise with warm air, and as they rise, they cool off and condense until they turn into clouds, and then when there's too much water, it rains. And that's a very basic water cycle. Water evaporates, turns into clouds, rains, and the whole thing just starts all over again. So how does water get into the sky, and what is a water cycle, and all that? There are a couple ways that water gets able to be turned into rain. So the main way is evaporation, and this is the process of evaporation just means a liquid turning into a vapor, and this is where most of the water in the water cycle comes from. So evaporated water can come from ponds, lakes, rivers, oceans, and what happens is the sun just heats up the water, turns into a vapor, and it rises, and as it rises, it cools off, condenses, turns into clouds. And another way that water gets into the water cycle is from plants. So moisture that evaporates from plants, this process is called transpiration. And something important to remember is that by removing trees, we remove water and therefore moisture from the water cycle. So with all of our water from evaporation and transpiration, we get rain. But climate can also affect rain, the weather of the area. So the wetter a location is, like the more water that's around it, or a place that's super dense with vegetation will experience more rain. So think like a rainforest and a coastal city versus a desert. The rainforest and coastal city obviously have more water than the desert. And deserts experience, practically zero rain because they don't have plants or water or anything to get that water up into the sky. And this is sort of where humans come into play because we play a part in altering landscapes. We alter them enough to affect weather patterns like rain, and we do this through agriculture, housing development, deforestation, building cities, depleting water sources, things like that. So developed human land, like cities, first of all, less plants, so that cuts out some significant water right there. But developed land like cities tend to have harder, or what we call impermeable ground surfaces, and impermeable just means that it's unable to be penetrated. So when it rains, the water doesn't penetrate. Dirt is a permeable surface, so water will penetrate it, and concrete is impermeable. So in a place with permeable ground, water is able to be absorbed by the ground and get to plants and either be, just used for plants, or trickle down into underground water reserves. And in cities where the surface is mostly impermeable, the water becomes what is known as runoff. So it just continues running until it finds a place to settle, and as it runs, it collects dirt and pesticides, and eventually it rolls into a body of water, and takes all those chemicals and dirt with it into the water. And then when this water evaporates, it brings all these chemicals into the rain with it. So, and then when this rain falls, it's something called acidic rain. And this rain, if it falls outside of the city, can damage plant life. And if it falls in the city or on another human-developed area, it can damage things. And there are ways to reduce this that we'll go over at the end. And developed lands like cities also tend to be very tall, and they act sort of like how mountains do. A little less extreme because they aren't quite as tall, but they play the same sort of role. And what mountains do is, because they're so tall, they force air to rise as it reaches them. So like, this is a mountain, this is a mountain, this is the air, and it forces the air up, and as the air rises, as we know, it cools and condenses into rain. But because all this moist air is over here, there's so much rain over here, and this side is completely dry, so it sort of creates like a weather barrier. In city buildings, because they're also tall, they don't create a barrier like that, but they do force air to go in one of two directions, and that's either up or around. One thing I should add to this is that cities are generally hotter than the air around it, and this is because of, buildings, cars, people, energy use. There's just generally a lot going on. And this is called the heat island effect. So cities are hot, which makes the air hot. And what does hot air do? It rises. So there's already an incentive here for, hot air to rise. As this air approaches the city, it can either go up or around. If it chooses to go up, it becomes a rain cloud, and because of this, cities tend to get more rain than the areas around it. And it can also take away rain from where it would normally go, and in this way it alters some rain patterns. However, air that goes around the city can end up in a location that it wouldn't naturally, or it can give certain places more rain than others. For example, south of Mumbai gets more rain than the average area around Mumbai because the cities influence the airflow more southward. And this can happen really with any city, but that's just a notable example. Oh yeah, we get it. Cities influence rain and weather patterns, but what can we do to lessen our effects? So first, in the cities, we can install what are called green roofs. There's a couple in Philly you might have seen around, but they're just roofs with plants on them that collect rainwater and reduce runoff and help to cool down the air around it, which all helps to regulate our disturbances. Next, we can use what is called permeable pavement, which again would absorb rainwater to reduce runoff and also reduce acid rain, because the water would be able to penetrate the ground surface instead of as it is now. And we can also take part in what is called urban forestry, which is just a fancy term for planting trees and other plants in the city. So filling up empty spots with plants or community gardens are both great examples of urban forestry. Every day we learn a little bit more about our impact and how we interact with our environment, which is really super cool. And it's important also to learn how to make a better, cleaner future. So hopefully now, whenever it rains, you'll have a little bit more insight into where the rain comes from.